Hello. Sometimes important news consists of things that don't happen rather than things that do. And today's one of those occasions. The building of a new nuclear power station at Hinkley Point didn't get the go-ahead today. Now, the board of the French electricity giant EDF was originally scheduled to sign off the £18 billion construction of Hinkley Point C, but it backed off. Could still happen next month or after. But clearly, there are lingering nerves that it is a project of such a scale that if EDF bungles it, it could destroy the company. And that's notwithstanding all the support the British government has offered. Now, here's the thing. If Hinkley Point is in trouble, so is Britain's energy strategy. We'll be getting perilously short of capacity as it is, and Hinkley is meant to build in 7% of our electricity by 2025. Its potential absence leaves a giant hole. Our policy editor, Chris Cook, has been looking at what's holding it up.
Can Britain keep the lights on without it costing a fortune? That concern about a so-called energy gap is a major worry. So it's important that plans for a massive new power plant, Hinkley Point C, now look a bit shaky. You might remember Hinkley. It's a proposed new nuclear station in Somerset to be built by EDF, the French electricity group. It's supposed to supply 7% of our electricity needs, but a confirmation announcement on Hinkley has been delayed.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Downing Street.
This might prove a serious embarrassment for the government. Signing a deal on Hinkley with China, which is supposed to finance a third of the cost, was a centrepiece of the state visit last year. It's also a major policy problem. British energy policy currently has three, sometimes competing objectives. The first of these is pretty simple: to make sure there's enough electricity to go round, even as demand increases, as is expected to do in the coming decades. The second is to decarbonise the energy production sector. And the third is to achieve the first two objectives without unnecessarily increasing bills, either for the taxpayer or the electricity consumer.
The supply position in Britain is not crisis level in the sense of there's going to be power cuts any day soon, but it is a serious problem in the sense that it costs more to keep the system balanced. Prices are higher than they otherwise would have been, and that means for manufacturing, for households, etc., that they are paying a price for us sailing so close to the wind. And for any modern economy, you know, there are things that you should take for granted. You shouldn't have to even question whether there's enough electricity supply.
That's why delays to Hinkley are a worry. So what's going on? Well, Hinkley will use a new type of reactor, an EPR. In fact, it's so new that it's yet to get running anywhere, and not for the want of trying. An EPR project in Flamanville in France is 6 years late and €7 billion over budget. And that is having huge ramifications for Hinkley. In France, a union with a seat on the EDF board is concerned about whether they can afford a project of this size and riskiness. The union says Hinkley Point represents a huge investment in terms of the market capitalisation of the group and its financial position. They see financial, industrial and legal risks to the project. Now, there's another reason why progress on these foreign reactors really matters. If you look through the small print of the deal offered to investors in the Hinkley Point plant, there are sweeteners for investors from our government. But they only take full effect if and when those foreign reactors can show that the design for Hinkley Point works. You can see why new delays in France in the past week might make investors nervous. And nuclear's a tough sell for them anyway.
Nuclear power stations are notoriously difficult to finance because for several different reasons, but one of the core ones is that they cost an enormous amount to build, and building is always risky. There's a lot of risk during construction. But key issue for investors is you don't get any cash flow out until you've spent every single penny of the construction business. Whereas, for example, if you spend a similar amount of money building a new or developing a new oil and gas field, you might only spend 20% of the money before you get some oil and gas out, and therefore you get some cash flow.
The cost to EDF of raising capital itself has also risen. This is the changing cost for EDF of borrowing for 15 years since last spring. It used to get debt at 1.5% a year. That's not quite doubled, but nearly. It's now 2.75%. So, could we have financed Hinkley in any other way?
We could have had a British component to this project. It could have been an Anglo-French project, for example, and it could have been financed by nuclear bonds, financed by the Treasury and rolled out, and the cost of capital and the cost of the project would have been substantially lower. Unfortunately, that argument has been lost, but we will live with the consequence of choosing the more expensive route for perhaps 60 years as a consequence.
But we are where we are, and problems in a French company's work on a French reactor have led to murmurs among investors about the next generation of British energy infrastructure as well.
Chris Cook there. Well, if the finances of Hinkley Point are challenged right now, remember that the economics of renewable energy also struggle when oil is as cheap as it is at the moment. So how awkward is all of this? We're joined by Jenny Jones of the Green Party and Sir Ed Davey, who was Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change from 2012 to 2015. And you, Ed, were negotiating with EDF on this very project for ages. It was painful, actually. It went on and on and on. Are you surprised that they, after all of that, have now just stepped back and said, hang on, let's think about this a little more?
No, not really. It's a very complicated deal. And it's a huge, big decision for them to make. And I think these are delays of weeks rather than months. And you've got to remember that it's not just actually about Hinkley Point C they're discussing on the EDF board. It's linked to what will happen at Sizewell C. That's linked to the Bryce, which people always forget. It's also linked to Bradwell, the other site in Essex, and the Chinese link there. So it's a highly complicated deal. So I'm simply not surprised it's been kicked down the road just a month or two.
They haven't actually got it working yet, either at Flamanville or in Finland.
Yeah,
massively over budget, massively delayed. I mean, have they bitten off more than they can chew? Because actually, we could talk about Hinkley Point C. It's actually 2 of these reactors they're going to build in Hinkley Point C. They haven't actually got one working yet. I mean,
Well, the key thing for me was making sure the British consumer was protected.
Yeah.
So the British consumer pays nothing until these things start generating, nothing at all. And we've also said that the contract isn't going to happen until Flamanville works. So we protected the UK. But George Osborne hasn't, because what George Osborne has done since the election is he's got rid of support for renewables. He's completely abandoned carbon capture and storage. These are 2 low-carbon technologies that we put in place as Liberal Democrats to compete, to make sure we weren't putting all our eggs in the nuclear basket. And he's actually played a very irresponsible card with Britain's energy policy. George Osborne's actually the real villain of this piece.
OK, well, that's interesting. Jenny Jones, you tweeted today, this makes me very happy on the news of the fact that they delayed this. Why did it make you happy?
Because I think it's a deal that should never have been struck, and it really mustn't go ahead. If this actually gets built, then we will have the most expensive nuclear power plant on Earth, and would also have the most expensive electricity being produced from any technology. It's absolute madness. You mentioned earlier the nuclear solution. It is not a solution. In fact, it is the start of a lot more problems.
Is that right?
No, I disagree. What's different from the deal that we struck to any other nuclear deal in the world is that the decommissioning costs are in the price. The price of managing the nuclear waste in the future are in the price.
It's 10p a kilowatt hour, more or less, isn't it? That you've agreed to pay for decades ahead.
Yeah, that's a lot cheaper, actually, than some of the renewables that we're investing in. Moreover, if you compare it, as you should do, with gas and coal plus their pollution costs, i.e. not just the wholesale price for coal and gas, but a carbon price on top. That would be the fair economic way of doing it. It's actually completely linked to those sorts of prices.
He was against nuclear. He came round when he actually had a job in government and had to work out.
It's because of climate change. It's because of climate change.
It's a terrible shame.
If you care about climate change, you should not be taking a low-carbon technology off the table.
Let Jenny Jones.
The whole point about nuclear is, for me, is that it has never been cost-effective. It hasn't stood on its own feet without public subsidies for 60 years, and it's not going to in the future either. The strike price on at this power station is going to be £92.50 per megawatt. That means, you know, you say that the consumer isn't paying, but the taxpayer is paying huge amounts of money to subsidise.
This brings us to a very interesting question. If you don't want nuclear, you don't want our heating to be run by gas, do you? Because that's carbon. You don't want our cars to run on petrol, do you? What do you want those to run on, cars and heating?
when we're looking at how to construct a future that's actually going to be viable
Yeah.
in terms of climate change and in needs for humans, then you have to think about renewables, heavily investing in
Right.
renewables,
But hang on.
also...
So just to be clear, you have to replace the nuclear power stations that are falling by the wayside, the coal, the gas power stations. You have to do that and introduce enough new power stations to run all our cars and heat all our homes. And you're going to do that how?
Gas is certainly going to be part of the make-up for some time. But if we had, for example, combined heat and power stations, then when the gas, when we want to downscale gas, we can start bringing in green gas from food waste and so on.
What, food waste is going to account to run all the automobiles in the United Kingdom?
Well, let's think about reducing the number of automobiles we have. You've also got to remember that actually our energy needs have gone down in the past few years. Now, that's quite unexpected when you think that our population's gone up, but people are understanding that you can actually save money and save on energy, and people are doing it. This government, including the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, has not invested in insulation or reducing people's need.
Ed Davey.
Well, listen, you made a really good point. I'm a huge fan of renewables. No, it's actually Evan and you.
Oh, just
listen, I'm a huge fan of renewables. I actually commission more renewables than any other British politician in history. I'm a huge fan of energy efficiency. But I am not a clairvoyant. I can't tell the future. I'm not divine. And there are lots of people who think they can. And I think we should be a bit more humble. And given that climate change is such a threat to humanity, I think we should have all low-carbon options on the table, including nuclear, including renewables, including energy efficiency, including carbon capture and storage. And what George Osborne is doing by abandoning carbon capture and storage, by cutting back on energy-efficient renewables, he's playing fast and loose with the climate and fast and loose with energy security.
Ed Davey, Jenny Jones, thanks both very much. I'm so sorry, we have to stop. Thanks.